Okay, our next guest is author of the book Superintelligence, and he asked the question, what would happen if mankind were able to develop a machine that would actually become more intelligent than its creator? We're going to talk about that a little bit today. Foreign Policy has named him one of the 100 top global thinkers. He's professor of philosophy, and he is director of the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford University. If you would, please join me in giving a warm round of applause, a warm welcome to Professor Nick Bostrom.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I want to zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture here. Let me just say a couple of words. We are this interdisciplinary research group. We have mathematicians, philosophers, computer scientists, economists working to try to think carefully about the really big picture questions for humanity. And one of our major focus is on artificial intelligence and where that might lead to in the longer run. I think that this will be a big deal. This is a different presentation. So it's a slightly different slideshow than the one I had in mind, but maybe it will work. I think rather than trying to reload it, we might work at this. This is a different variation of the same thing, so it should work. So if we think back at what has happened to date, we can reflect on the fact that the modern human condition is this huge anomaly. We used to be hunter-gatherers running around on the African savanna for almost the entirety of this 100,000-year period that we have existed here. I'll come to AI, it's still part of it. And after a lot of progress, and a lot of hard work, a lot of technological progress, we have reached the modern human condition, which we now take to be the normal way for things to be. The alarm wakes up in the morning, you commute into the office, and you sit in front of a screen all day. This seems to be the normal way for things to be, so that if one is entertaining some hypothesis according to which the future might be very different from what it is now, that is regarded as an extraordinary hypothesis that requires some extraordinary proof. Whereas, in fact, if you think about it from this historical perspective, the modern human condition is this aberration. It's like a recent development. It's not really been like this for very long. And it would seem to me to be an extraordinary hypothesis to think that this will continue on now forever, that this will be the way it is. It seems more plausible that perhaps we will reach even further in this path of technological development. So from this point of view, if one wants to think seriously about where the long term might lead us, one needs to consider seriously the idea that there could be a fundamental change in the human condition. Another way to look at the same thing, make the same point, is if you just look at global economic growth over a long period of time. I've plotted for you world GDP over the past 10,000 years. This is actually based on real data as far as we can estimate it. And you see, again, this very unusual shape. It doesn't look like the current state of affairs is a stable condition, like we've now reached some kind of plateau that we will sit on forever. So when we are thinking about the future of humanity, we take seriously the idea that there could be this fundamental change in human affairs. And in particular, it looks to me that the transition to the machine intelligence era might be the most likely cause of a fundamental shift. If we think about what created the human condition in the first place, that it's clear that this transition in the substrate of thinking has a big role to play in the explanation. Like, yes, why did we have this kind of thing? Well, of course, it's because of economic growth. Why the economic growth? Because of technological development. But why the technological development? Well, it's because of this slight increase in general intelligence among some of our distant ancestors that made it possible for knowledge to start to accumulate from generation to generation, for us to really make progress on technology. And that has now placed us in this contemporary human condition where the human species has this unique position on the planet, where the future is shaped largely by our human preferences and our human interactions, and why the future of the gorillas and the chimpanzees in particular seem to now depend a lot more on what we humans do than on what the gorillas do themselves. And so underlying this, there were these small tweaks in the substrate of thinking. We know that not too many tweaks, because there just haven't been that many generations since our last common ancestor with the chimpanzees. So evolutionary development of complex new mechanisms take a lot of generations, and in a few thousand generations, that can just really be some small tweaks of machinery that was already basically in place. Also some scaling, like we have slightly more of it, maybe by a factor of 3 or something like that. So if I'm thinking about superintelligence, there are then different possible ways in which you could imagine getting there. You could imagine further increases to biological intelligence, such as we have seen over historical times, or you could imagine machine intelligence getting there. It might be an open question. Which of these paths will all get there first? I think both of these are in principle possible. On the one hand, you have a much higher current level of cognition in biology. Like humans and even other animals are just like far above current computers in terms of general cleverness, ingenuity, creativity, common sense. On the other hand, AI is progressing at a more rapid clip. So to first approximation, it's an open question. Which of these will first get there? Like with more granularity, we can distinguish biomedical enhancements to human cognition, and AI that can either be of a purely synthetic form or inspired to various degrees by biology. In the extreme case, you would actually just try to copy in a machine substrate what is done naturally in biology. Or you could imagine some hybrid approach where you try to combine the best of biology and AI. I think that is actually less likely to be where the action would be. And I'd be happy to talk more about that afterwards. So I want to, since this is actually a different sort of slide deck, I'm a little, like every time a new slide comes up, I'm as surprised as you are. But I think that what I will want to talk about is not so much today the biology stuff, but the AI stuff. So let's maybe fast forward some biology stuff and see what we get to. Yes, so because I only have limited time. So on the AI thing, I want to say a few things. So when people think about artificial intelligence, typically what might spring to mind are these past milestones that have occurred. The defeat of Garry Kasparov by Deep Blue. Big event at the time it happened. Now it no longer looks so big because we don't think of chess anymore as this best test of general intelligence. But before, a lot of people thought that chess was really the epitome of an intellectual task, something that required deep logical thinking, strategy, a really hard challenge. But we kind of changed our perspective on that once machines succeeded. There has been a lot of progress in legged locomotion, self-driving cars, more recently the quiz show Jeopardy, kind of trivia show where IBM, again, produced this Watson system that defeated the all-time human champions. More recently, the DeepMind company, now part of Google, developed this algorithm that can learn to play a bunch of these Atari games. You might remember these from when you grew up, kind of relatively simple computer games. But the interesting thing there is not that you can build an AI that can play one of these Atari games, like big deal, but that now you have a computer game that can learn to play any of a wide set of these very different Atari games, just by looking at the raw pixel feed. This illustrates a kind of shift that has taken place in artificial intelligence. It used to be about building expert systems in the 60s and 70s, and you would have human engineers that would handcraft features, handcraft knowledge, put it into a box, and the AI itself could make some simple logical derivations, but you basically got out only what you put into the box. But now the focus is on machine learning, on crafting algorithms that can learn from experience to find patterns in stimuli to build up more complex layers of representation and can learn policies by trial and error from just running around and exploring the environment. Even more recently, I mean, as in just a few days ago, there was this big, I don't know if you followed it, but in Asia, the game Go is kind of what, it's probably bigger than chess is in the West. And DeepMind succeeded in beating like this legendary human player, Lee Sedol, in a 5-game match, won 4-1. Go has long been regarded as far more difficult for computers to do because it relies a lot more on visual intuition and recognizing patterns in a complexity. You can't kind of just logically think your way through very deeply into the search tree. And there's been a rapid progress in that since last year, and so this was a big triumph just recently. And this relies on a recent class of machine learning algorithms that has evoked a lot of excitement in the last couple of years, deep learning. And these are basically neural network algorithms, like multi-layered neural networks that look at kind of raw perceptual data, and then in each layer, rough rules, extracts more and more abstract features and properties that are present in the input, but not specified by the programmers. It just kind of learns to find these patterns. Also, it used reinforcement learning algorithms, which is a fairly general framework for developing plans and policies. So again, I think the AlphaGo system that defeated Lee Sedol is actually a more significant achievement than Deep Blue was back when it beat Kasparov, because the technology that was used to create AlphaGo is general purpose. These algorithms, with some small variations, I think might well do well on a whole host of other game applications. And more generally, with the same basic algorithms can be used for a lot of other applications outside game AI. So deep learning is used now in, say, image recognition, image tagging, automated translation, speech recognition. It's a general method, in particular for replicating a lot of the things that human perceptual intelligence does, so recognizing patterns in complicated input fields. And so this is the way I think that AI will eventually be achieved, full general AI. It will be through machine learning, by crafting algorithms that get better and better at learning, finding patterns, at planning, rather than by sort of human experts sitting down in groups and handcrafting module after module that then, over time, eventually amounts to everything. I think it will be the same general purpose ingenuity that makes us humans clever that will also eventually make machines clever. So already, AI is used in a wide range of different applications, but underlying these big milestones, there are these sort of underlying algorithmic improvements that have been accumulating in the history of AI, which is really not that old. I mean, you can date it back maybe to 1956 or so. There was a big conference that is sometimes said to have started the field of AI. We didn't really have computers much earlier than that. So in the scheme of things, all of this that has been achieved is in the lifetime of people alive today. And so when one is thinking about what might be achieved in the lifetime of people who are born now, that's, even if one just sort of saw the same amount of progress, that could still take us quite far. Another factor that has driven progress, of course, is improved hardware. And if you look at some particular domain, like chess computing, or where the computers have continued to improve since Deep Blue, it didn't stop there. As a rough rule of thumb, about half of the progress is due to just machines getting faster, and roughly half is due to algorithmic improvements. And as a rule of thumb, that seems to hold across a wide range of different domains. So in the history of AI, there have been previous times when there has been great excitement. When they first started, people were very optimistic. Some of the pioneers thought that they would have the AI problem cracked within a decade or so. It turned out to be more difficult. So then this initial wave of excitement gave way to what's known as the first AI winter. There was a period of time when the very term artificial intelligence became almost a term of abuse. Like if you had a startup company, you wouldn't want to say that you were doing AI. It became seen as this thing that was kind of overhyped and flaky. Then there was a second wave of excitement, an AI spring, that also was followed by a second AI winter. So again, there were overblown expectations, and the field kind of fell quiet. And now we are in the third AI spring again. So there, as of the last 2 or 3 years, this great sense of excitement once more. And of course, it's anybody's guess whether this will be the wave that kind of carries all the way through, or whether there will be several more cycles, perhaps, of inflated expectations followed by disillusionment. But there have been some actual scientific progress done, and also this current excitement is reflected in industry activity, where with a number of high-profile acquisitions, and right now a kind of scramble for talent, where all of the big tech companies are setting up some kind of AI lab effort internally. Google has the DeepMind effort in London, and another big Google Brain effort over in Mountain View in California. Facebook has an AI team, Microsoft, IBM, Baidu. All of these are now competing for talents and like scooping up graduates from academic institutions. There are a number of applications already. Sometimes we don't think of these as AI, because this is something that bugs AI researchers. Like sometimes when AI actually starts to work, we no longer think of it as AI. It just becomes software. But techniques that were initially developed in AI laboratories, have entered widespread use, and I think we'll, see a proliferation of applications over the next few years. And one reason to think that there won't be another AI winter, at least not anything as severe as previously, is that the techniques that are already developed are already sufficiently good to be practically useful for a variety of fields. And so, it might be that some of the rhetoric will cool down, but I don't think that the field will go away, or that people will stop investing heavily in research, because it's already a competitive advantage if you're like the ability to say, tag photos, or have search engines or recommender systems that compare products with people. The Internet of Things, they're just like self-driving cars, like a lot of different promising applications, either already possible or clearly likely to become possible in the near-term future. So that's one reason for thinking that this time there will probably be like enough substance for the momentum to carry on. So I've already talked about that. There are a number of different outstanding technical challenges that remain. Transfer learning is the idea of being able to use knowledge and skills you learned by solving problems in one domain and apply them to different domains. And this is still something that is a challenge. A bunch of other things. This raises a number of issues that people like to talk about that are more near-term, like the ones on this. But the bulk of our focus is really what happens if and when AI goes all the way. And because I don't think that it's going to make a few more incremental advances and make spam filters slightly more efficient and then stop there. I think from the very beginning, the ambition has been in artificial intelligence to do all the things that humans can do. And I think, failing some big sort of civilization-wrecking catastrophe, I think that we will, move down that pathway. And we don't know how far away it is, but if it's possible, I think we will eventually get there. And that, I think, raises a very different kind of challenge to all of these near-term issues. Because at that point, what you have is not just one more technical innovation. You don't have just one more cool technology, like one more instrument. You really have, at that point, the last invention that humans will ever need to make, if you think about it. So once you have machines that first match us in general intelligence and then exceed human general intelligence, then that machine intelligence will itself be able to drive further innovation faster and more efficiently than human brains can do. Right? And so what you have, I think, with the development of general machine intelligence is really this general purpose technology, the effect of which will be a kind of telescoping of the future. So if you think of all the things that you might imagine human civilization to be able to do in the very long term, like if human scientists could work on the problem for 40,000 years, maybe you would have a cure for aging, let's just say, right? Or you would have space colonization, you would have all kinds of stuff you could imagine in the really long run. But all of those things that might be far away, if we imagine progress continuing by human scientists making that progress, I think all of those things might happen quite shortly after the development of machine superintelligence. And another big fundamental difference is that you have here potentially not just a tool, an extension, but something that in itself might have agency. You might have superintelligent artificial agents, things that themselves can make plans, can have criteria for choosing between plans, can have preferences, and are able to anticipate, say, our reactions to their choices. This, again, makes it very different from all kinds of other technologies, kind of inert, or at least not actively kind of trying to plan around our anticipated reactions. And so for these two reasons, because superintelligence could be extremely powerful, for the same ultimate reasons that humans are very powerful relative to other animals, like why the fate of the gorilla is now in human hands rather than in the hands of the gorillas, because we are slightly smarter. For the same basic reasons, superintelligence can be very powerful relative to us, I think. Because of that, and because they could have artificial agency, they could themselves have goals and criteria and act as optimizing machines on the world using criteria that need not necessarily match ours, I think that this transition to the machine intelligence era could be associated with significant existential risks. That it could be like one of the most hazardous things that will ever have happened, like that could have extremely beneficial consequences for the world if the transition goes well, but also it's the kind of thing that we might only get one shot at getting right, and if we make an error there, it might be irrecoverable, for reasons that we can talk more about in the Q&A. So I wrote this book like a year and a half ago or 2 years ago now that tried to not so much talk about the current state of the art in machine learning or exactly how we might get to superintelligence, but taking seriously the question, if and when we actually do get first to human-level machine intelligence, and then, as I believe, if that point is reached, superintelligence fairly shortly after, like what happens then? Like, what can we say now about how that transition might play out? What are, in particular, the ways in which it could go wrong? And what are the actions that we could take now that, if there actually is some non-trivial probability that this transition to the machine intelligence era might happen, perhaps in the lifetime of people alive today, like what are the actions that we could make now that would actually create better initial conditions for this transition? Because it seemed to me that this just was like maybe the most important thing that will happen in this century, and it was almost entirely neglected and ignored, certainly by academia. And it's like a little bit discussion by science fiction authors or in the popular media, but no serious research on it. That just seemed that it had to change. And so there has actually been some shift since then, over the past couple of years. A big shift where there is now like the beginnings of a research field forming around some of these questions. The control problem: how could you engineer an artificial motivation system, so as to actually make sure that if you knew how to make a machine really smart, that really smart machine would then also, do what the creators intended, that it would like be on our side, be human-friendly, be aligned with human intention. So that involves some big technical problems, and where there's now sort of research groups springing up in different places around the world, like actually trying to start work on that. Also, although it's still fairly marginal, a more serious conversation about the social economic impacts of this, the ethical questions that will arise. So this is still very early stages. This is still, compared to the magnitude of this challenge, if I'm right, that this actually has a non-trivial chance of occurring, the amount of effort that humanity is spending on trying to understand it is still piddling. But a lot more than 2 years ago. And so I think that is encouraging, and I think that in addition to this like attempt to sort of think through these issues in advance. I think the other impetus that has brought these issues to the fore is just like the rate of technical advance in machine learning that has been maybe faster than people expected over the past couple of years. So I want to leave a lot of time for Q&A, but those are some of the things that I was talking about in the book and some of the things that my research institute are doing. So I'll draw a line there, and then we can pick it up. Thanks.
Have a seat. Thank you very much for that presentation. Do you think that we are going to reach this level where artificial intelligence does become smarter than us? Is that going to happen in this century, without a doubt?
Not without a doubt, no. I think these things, in general, major, distant future technical breakthroughs, it's just not possible for us to predict with very much timing precision how long they will take.
But it feels like it's just around the corner, doesn't it?
I don't think it feels like it's just, well, it depends on, what do you mean by just around the corner?
Well, I mean, you and I, when we talked a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the notion of artificial intelligence and people thinking it's something that's still, it's in the realm of science fiction. But, you told me on the phone, even using Google, using a search engine, that is a form of artificial intelligence.
So AI is already here and has existed for a long time. So that's kind of behind several corners back.
Yep.
So I guess in general, one wants to be very careful about what one means by it. So if we want to form some hypothesis about the future, before we decide whether we believe it or not, we want to make sure we don't know what the hypothesis actually says. So clearly there will be action in machine intelligence and machine learning in the near future. Things are moving rapidly now. It's going to continue. But I think this transition to the point where machines can substitute for human laborers in all fields, in particular in fields like scientific creativity, and have the same general purpose, smartness. That's a much more radical proposition, where different people have different views about how far it is. We did a poll a couple of years ago of some of the world's leading AI experts, and one of the questions we asked there was, by which year do you think there is a 50% probability that we will have human-level machine intelligence, which we defined for the purposes of that poll as being able to perform virtually all jobs, at least as well as a human adult, typical human adult. And the median answer to that question was 2040 or 2050, depending on precisely which group of experts you asked. But with a large spread on both sides.
But that's not talking about having a level of consciousness the way you and I, the way we all have. Well, it's a completely different ballgame.
Consciousness is possibly a separate question. I think that these machines could have an extremely strong impact on the world, whether or not inside of them there is subjective, qualitative experience or not. So to some extent, you can bracket the question of consciousness and focus just on this kind of performance aspects of intelligence. As long as they have very high intelligence, problem-solving capability, the ability to find plans that reliably achieve an outcome, that is already enough for this possible technology to have enormous transformative impacts.
I mean, you said we may only have one chance to get it right. Why is that? I mean, because one scenario that you're painting there is that we're going to have these machines that are smarter than us and that want to do good things for us. They want to cure cancer. They want to find the answer to aging. Why would they want to help us?
Well, so they are not one fixed thing. There's a huge space of possible artificial minds, possible systems that could exist that are consistent with the laws of physics. We will reach into that space of possible designs and pull out one or a small number of things that we will actually choose to make real.
Okay.
And so there are artificial minds that would have values identical to ours, that are artificial minds that would have very different goals and criteria. So depending on which of these we succeed in designing, they might either be aligned with us or work at cross purpose. Yeah. And so one of the points I make in the book, though, is that in order to find a super intelligent agent that is actually working for our benefit, you might have to very carefully design its goal system. Most arbitrary goals that you might imagine an AI to have would give it instrumental reasons to do things that would be harmful to humans if it were sufficiently powerful. So let me illustrate that. So the standard example here, it's like a cartoon example, but it makes the point, is that of a paperclip AI. Right? So you imagine a super intelligent machine that has as its goal to make as many paper clips as possible. Maybe you build it to run a paper clip factory. Right?
Okay.
So the idea here is that when this AI is relatively weak, before it becomes super intelligent, that maybe the only way it can make a lot of paper clips is to just run this paper clip factory more efficiently and everybody's happy. But once you become super intelligent, once you get like extreme power, possibly from having the ability to invent new technologies, then there are other ways of making more paper clips than just operating this factory. You might make more paper clip factories, for example.
Right.
You might prevent humans from switching off, because then there would be fewer paper clips.
And how do you prevent the machine from doing things? Okay, let's take the paperclip example. Let's say the machine says, I'm going to make more paper clips, but I need these resources, which the humans also need. So the humans have to go without while I make more paper clips.
Right.
Now, how do you convince or create a machine that is not going to take away from the humans in order to make more paper clips?
So I think the answer is not to build a paperclip AI that is super intelligent in the first place. Like, you don't want to be in a situation where you have a super intelligent adversary.
Okay. Okay, but how are you going to know that? How are you not going to build the super intelligent paperclip machine?
Right. So at the moment, if you think about what kind of goals can we actually put into a machine today, because at the end of the day, what you have to do is you have to write a program in C++ or Python or a computer program and specify some objective function, right? So today we could do something like calculate the decimal expansion of pi. Like, that's something you can formally specify. What you couldn't do today is an objective like maximize love or happiness or justice or beauty or any plausible human conception, even the simplest, like maximize like pleasure or something, like a reductionistic view of human values. Even that you couldn't put into a computer program. So there's this big technical challenge. How could you learn how to endow an AI with any plausible human value? And this is an open technical research question. There are different approaches. Like, broadly speaking, the idea that you would solve this problem by creating a long list of everything we care about and then sort of putting each item in, that just looks hopeless. It's not going to work.
What about creating a supercomputer or an intelligent computer that feeds some very base human desires? For example, sex, sexual pleasure. Why not create a machine that is super intelligent, that sees its only duty in life is to make sure humans maximize their sexual pleasure?
Well,
is that something feasible?
There is a general syndrome here. Like, so one can, I'll discuss that particular one, but it's important to generalize from the. So in general, you try to create some. You make a guess at what would be a good thing. Then you realize that there is a sort of unintended way for the AI to achieve that goal. So say pleasure, sexual pleasure, or pleasure in general, like the way you would actually maximize that, it seems, would involve, as a first approximation, you would want to take direct control of the human neurophysiology of pleasure, not just move things around in the external world. You would want to directly operate on the pleasure mechanism in the brain. Then you might do away with the body, most of the rest of the brain. You need a visual cortex. Maybe that's just inefficient. Then maybe you do away with human neurology altogether. Maybe you could instantiate pleasure more densely in matter by building, say, computing machinery that's just optimized for performing a kind of pleasure reward loop.
Yeah.
And so you might get a future where the future light cone is consisting of some matter organized in a structure that just maximize the instantiation of whatever algorithm, according to your definition of pleasure, would qualify. Okay. This might be very different from what you had in mind when you had these dirty fantasies of what the future, you had, oh, wow, there will be all these kind of curve. So you might get something quite different. And even just defining pleasure or sexual pleasure, like you would actually try to have to specify some definition of that. So that we don't know how to do that. Like, that's some. So the more promising approach, well, there are several, but like one promising approach to explore is the idea of using the AI's own intelligence to learn about human values. So that rather than we doing all the cognitive work in advance, you would try to create an AI that, by observing human behavior, maybe interacting or asking human questions, it could learn about what it is that we value. And if it's super intelligent, a super good learner, it would be very good at learning what we value. And then the second component is that it would then also have to be designed in such a way that it cares about what it learns that we value. So it's one thing to learn that you want X, but if I don't care about what you want, the disaster might still be outcome. So you would have to engineer its motivation system such that it would be motivated at any given point in time to choose its actions based on its evolving guesses about what it is that we want, something like that. And that's one of the avenues that is being pursued.
I mean, you're describing the character Data from Star Trek and the Next Generation, right? He's super intelligent.
Is he?
Well, he's supposed to be, and he
looks
observes.
Pretty human intelligent to me.
Well, no, but his goal is to assist humans and to observe human beings. Is that something that you could foresee would happen?
I could foresee that AIs will already observe humans to serve up better search results. You observe what results people click on and so on.
Yeah.
So one of the major obstacles to even engaging with these questions in a serious way, I think, is the tendency to anthropomorphize AI. That we project all kinds of human tendencies and psychological idiosyncrasies onto artificial intelligences. There's just no reason to think that they would be present there unless you specifically build them in.
Okay.
So we think of AI as this kind of nerdy human, like somebody who's really good at math and engineering, but kind of slightly socially tone deaf. And there's just no reason to think that that would in any way reflect what the superintelligence would be.
How would we ensure that something that is super intelligent would care about us?
Well, that is, one way to formulate this control problem. How it would care about us, care about what we want, do what we intended to do. Like, all of these are different ways of describing something that involves a big technical problem. The problem of value learning, or some other way of controlling what the superintelligence would do.
That means we would still control it, though, right? Or not?
Well, in some kind of way. I mean, it's like, imagine how could the chimpanzees or the ancestors, the last common ancestor, like, if you could imagine, okay, so they couldn't really sit around and talk, they didn't have language, but if you imagine them sitting around the campfire and thinking, oh, there's going to be these humans one day.
Right.
Like, how could we sort of breed a version of humanity or engineer a version of humanity that would actually be nice to us?
Yeah.
And that's a little bit like the challenge we're confronting, except there are a lot of differences, of course. Like,
I want to open it up to the floor in just a second, but I want to ask you, how do you foresee the future if we get it wrong? If you say we have this one chance to either get it right or to get it wrong, well, what happens if we get it wrong? Can you kind of paint a picture for us what that's going to look like?
There are several different scenario classes where things go wrong in different ways. But in one broad class, which is what you get if you're assuming that you have this AI that becomes very powerful, like you have a sudden intelligence explosion, you have one superintelligence so far ahead of the others that it could just like shape the future according to its preferences. Then in that kind of scenario, what can go wrong is that you get a paper full of paper clips, let's just say, with no humans or sentience or any other things. You just get more and more factories producing more and more paper clips with space colonizing probes going to other planets, making them into paperclip factories forever. You have a future optimized for paper clips, or it might be the computation of the decimal expansion of pi, or whatever value turned out to be easier for us to specify. So we give that value to the first thing that became superintelligence, and then it uses its superintelligence. So that's one class of scenario. Now there's a very different class of scenarios where you have a more gradual transition, so you don't get some superintelligence that forms a singleton, and just you have instead maybe a competition between different AIs, like a more gradual transition, so you don't just have one thing that then you can have in unfavorable multipolar outcomes, you can have sort of evolutionary dynamics, economic competitive dynamics operating on this population of digital minds, maybe selecting for minds that are very highly economically productive, but don't actually use those resources for fun stuff.
So we would create several entities that would actually compete with each other.
Well, so in one class of scenarios, that would happen, and particularly likely if the transition happens more slowly, right? Because if the transition from say, human level to superintelligence, to take one extreme. Suppose that happened in a week. Like just no. So then it's unlikely that there will be 2 or more companies, labs, countries that are so close to one another in the development process that the leader is just less than a week ahead of the other one.
Yeah.
It's more likely than that the leading lab will have sort of completed the transition to superintelligence before the other has even started it. So then you get this singleton outcome. But if the transition is slower, let's suppose it takes decades, then it's more likely that there will be many different AI systems, countries, companies, and entities that have their own AIs that, they all end up perhaps radically super intelligent, but at no point is any one of them so far ahead of the others that it can just lay down. So in that case, you then can have these competitive dynamics, and in certain scenarios that could lead in an undesirable direction, like evolution goes wherever the fitness landscapes
Survival of the fittest.
tunnel it, and that need not be in a beneficial direction. Like there is no law of nature that says that evolutionary competition leads to better outcomes.
Right, it's survival of the fittest, but the fittest are not necessarily the best,
No,
right?
no, that's right.
What about a vision, and I'm sure everyone has thought about this at some point, like from the Terminator movies, where the computers actually become conscious and decide that humans are in the way and want to get rid of us. Can you see that type of existential threat arising?
Well, so if you remove the suddenly get conscious part of the question,
Okay,
and
I'll
you
take
remove
that
the
out.
Terminator part of the
Okay.
question, then...
I mean, I'm trying to make it accessible to
Yeah,
everyone.
I mean, I know there's a tension there. You want to be concrete and vivid, but at the same time, the more specific detail you add to your scenario, the lower its probability. Like, there are more specific things that would have to be true.
Okay.
So yeah, the suddenly get conscious is just not a necessary part of the scenario. And in general, like anything that you see in a science fiction movie or a Hollywood movies is... It's hard enough to get like the future right, even if all you're trying to do is to get the future right. But if at the same time, you're also trying to tell a compelling story where there has to be human protagonists that, face a sequence of gradually increasing challenges and then come together at the end. So, like, then the intersection between good story scenarios and plausible futures might just be empty.
Yeah.
But at the more abstract level, is it possible that there could be superintelligence that would act on the world in such a way as to remove humans and human values? I mean, I think that's among the scenarios that you want to that you want to assign probability to. And
okay. Well, what kind of probability do you assign to it?
I'm not sure I would have a precise number ready. I think large enough that it's worth putting in effort today to reduce it, right? It just looks like a very major transition, and even if all you could do, like suppose the best you could do by working hard on this for decades with like hundreds of people around the world working on it, even if you could just reduce the existential risk by 1%. Like that, in expected value terms, might be the best investment that anybody ever made. Like because what's at stake is just so enormous, like it's the entire future. And so, in a sense, the implications for what we have reason to do now don't depend very sensitively on what the level of risk is. Like if you thought the risk was extremely small, like 1 in a billion or something, then maybe you should just ignore it. But whether the risk is, 1% or 10% or 50%, like it still means that we should probably focus a lot more on, on this issue today than we are.
Do you have problems sleeping at night?
I had problem sleeping last night because I had to get up too early. I missed the flight, and it's a big story.
But when you're dealing with these types of scenarios and talking about existential threats to humanity, do you worry about?
For the most part, it becomes like any other problem you're working on a long-term basis. It's not a matter of sort of working your way up or being anxious. It's a matter of trying to make intellectual progress on a set of, take a big problem, you try to decompose it into smaller parts, and those into smaller parts, then you try to solve a small part. And so on a day-to-day basis, the predominant mode is kind of one of analytic cognitive activity, probably not that different from any other research activity.
Okay. Okay. Any questions for Professor Bostrom? We've got one here. Oh, we got a lot. Okay, let's see. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, go ahead.
Start? Okay. In the last years, we've been a lot of progress using neural networks to solve issues or problems that we cannot code into algorithms. Do you see a possibility that these neural networks will be used to teach these neural networks to learn faster? So actually, the neural networks will be used to improve artificial intelligence models, stuff like that.
Yeah, so in very limited ways, you can already see it. You could have various forms of architectures where you say first train a big neural network, and then you try to use that to train a more efficient, smaller, faster neural network. Another way in which current AI involves some limited form of sort of recursive self-improvement is in hyperparameter optimization. So you have a particular, say, neural network architecture, other architecture. It has a number of different parameters that are specified by hand, and you can sort of try different ones and see which work best, results in the fastest learning. But you could also automate that process and try to be a little bit clever about how you explore the different possible settings of the hyperparameters to try to optimize a given architecture. So I think that there will be more things like that tried. I mean, at some point, and one way in which you might get, at some point, an intelligence explosion, like a very rapid growth, is if and when you have AI that becomes very good at improving AI. So if you, in specific, get a kind of superintelligence specifically in AI research, computer programming, then that might be a specialized form of superintelligence that very quickly results in general superintelligence, because that's the specific kind of superintelligence that you need to kind of bootstrap to the rest. And that is one reason for taking these sort of rapid transition scenarios seriously, in that you can get the feedback loop at some point.
There's this gentleman right here.
Nick, yeah, do you think we will actually recognize this transition to superintelligence, because it may just continue quite unnoticeably, and that we may actually already be a paperclip factory as humanity now, from the point of view of our ancestors?
Yeah, so you could, if you think, so an individual human biological is not really that different from 10,000 years ago, but as a culture, as a society, we can accomplish feats that are sort of superhuman. We can build rocket ships that go to the moon and stuff like that. And so if you want to think of collective intelligences and think of the scientific community or human civilization as constituting one big of those, then there might already have been one kind of leap forward, where today's society is a kind of collective superintelligence relative to 10,000 years ago. I mean, it doesn't say anything about, and it doesn't in any way, as far as I can see, reduce the possibility that you might have a second transition, say, to a different medium, machine intelligence substrate, of a similar magnitude or larger, that might be a lot faster than this slow accumulation of institutional knowledge and accumulated scientific knowledge and cultural knowledge over the several thousand years, and that all the same issues would rise. So it's not so much a concern about sort of the metaphysical status of human beings. It's more a concern about what, in a very concrete, material way, would be the impacts of having introduced into the world this extremely powerful optimization mechanism that might operate on timescales far faster than humans, and that would be superhuman in anticipating, say, our responses to it and figuring out plans to achieve its goals.
Okay, right here.
Thank you for the presentation. I just would like to ask you about the intelligence is a product of many things. So for the intelligence of the machine and the intelligence of the human, do you see that the inputs are similar? Because from my point of view, I see that the interaction with the environment around the intelligence, which create inventions, as example, is not there in the machine intelligence. So what I really believe that the human intelligence will be always in ahead of the machine intelligence, because the factors resulted in the machine intelligence is a little bit less than the factor resulted in the human intelligence.
The factors, so I'm not sure. So it's certainly the case that when we achieve some impressive technological feat today, it's usually not one person sitting in a room for 10 years kind of creating it out of things. It's like a whole institution of people that soak in knowledge from other parts and interacting. So I'm not sure how you got from there to the idea that humans will always be the dominant form of intelligence.
Because humans have much more inputs from the entire environment. I mean, like the
So this, need not hold. Like a computer can have a lot of inputs. You could have, so a human has like 2 eyeballs. Like a computer could have 1 billion video cameras. It could have any number of sensors. They could all be linked up. You could have, if to the extent that sensory perceptual input is necessary, you could have machines that surpass humans in that just as much as machines that surpass humans in the processing capability. In fact, we are much further ahead in the sensor technology. We already have like video cameras with high resolution and microphones and all of that stuff. I don't see that as a limit, really. I think it's the sort of the brain part that will be the last bit to fall into place. And you might have more than one AI as well. I mean, these are both scenarios that it's not as if we have to imagine one AI versus 7 billion humans. You might imagine having, many more AIs than you have humans in some scenarios, although the individuation here becomes more problematic. It's whether you have one or many, once they are tightly networked and can share information, like that very distinction itself becomes maybe less relevant.
So my last comment, do you think that this intelligence of the machines can invent something in the future?
Whether machines can invent things in the future?
Yes.
Yeah, so if you have superintelligence, it can certainly invent things. Even before that, you could have limited inventions. So we have already, there are like limited inventions that have been done wholly or partially by AI. You could have, for example, evolutionary algorithms have produced simple electronic circuitry designed antennas that were actually patentable and so forth. You have, in limited ways today, you have like these kind of neural networks can be used to generate artworks. There was recently an exhibition, based on some of this inceptionism work that you can get from running these deep neural networks. In limited ways, AIs can already invent. Of course, they are not very smart, so they can only invent limited, not very impressive things. But I don't see a qualitative difference, so that they would be able to do everything except inventing, and then the holy grail of inventing comes into play. I think invention and creativity is just one manifestation of general purpose intellectual capability, and you will see more and more of that as the machines become better and better able at learning.
I found your first picture in the presentation very interesting, where you show the exponential growth of the world GDP. And I think you said in the beginning, how can we plateau this? Or if I understand it right, the task is now to stop progress and to plateau this exponential learning curve. Otherwise, we take the risk that AI takes over and maybe destroys us all. So do we have in history any analogy or any example where we're able to stop progress and to plateau?
Yeah, no, I don't think that is the task. I don't think it will happen. I don't think it's worth trying to make it happen, and I think it would ultimately be bad if it somehow did happen. Like I think the transition to the machine intelligence era is this kind of portal through which we ultimately will have to pass in order to realize the full potential of what human civilization could produce. But that transition is associated with risks that can be reduced if we get our act together and actually put in some of the hard work far in advance. I just don't. think it would be either desirable or feasible to try to prevent that.
Okay.
Ja, ich habe auch noch eine Frage. Sorry, I also have a question. Our goal with industrialization 4.0 is that machines should replace humans. And it goes on with 5.0 and so on, surely in the same direction. And all the machines are connected. So therefore, there will be not only one machine, probably in future, which may be more intelligent or stronger than we are. It will be a kind of network. See, all machines at all work as one, probably.
So what was your question?
And the question is there any kind of point of no return to your vision of probably that the machines take over? Like in the evolution, we took the top place, maybe the machines one day takes the place, and is there any kind of point of no return where we can avoid that?
No, I mean, I think that the scenarios in which the machine intelligence transition fails to happen are, for the most part, existential catastrophes. Like that is, human civilization might permanently destroy ourselves beforehand with maybe some bioterrorism or some other technology, like nuclear war, or some other way that we might permanently destroy our future. I think some of those, should be taken seriously, and there could be ways in which we could fail. It does look very likely to me, though, that if we avoid those scenarios, that we will continue to make progress in science and technology on a wide front, and that will eventually, at some point, culminate in general machine intelligence. And that it would be worth investing some effort now into understanding the issues that will then arise at that point. Because it might be that some of those issues can't be solved quickly, that maybe they require cumulative research over years or decades to really have the insights that we will need to design the right control mechanisms. And so that's why it seems worth starting that work today.
You were touching the point of consciousness a couple of times during your discussion, and I would like to know what sort of gap do you see between consciousness and artificial intelligence? And secondly, are there some technical approaches, artificial intelligence approaches to overcome that gap between consciousness and artificial intelligence?
I think that the concept of consciousness tends to confuse people, and so it should only be introduced if it's unavoidable. For most of the things I talked about, you don't have to roll in the question of consciousness. You can still think about what the instrumental impacts of these machines will be on the world. What can they do? Whether or not there is some inner life, they might still have a big impact on the world. They might invent, all kinds of new technologies. They might impact the economy. They might do all kinds of things. The main place where the question of consciousness becomes relevant is if we're thinking about some ethical questions that involve, say, the moral status of the machines. If we are interested in whether the machines themselves have moral standing, that question plausibly depends on whether the machines are conscious or not. So at that point, you can no longer avoid asking about consciousness. So my view on that is that at least some forms of computational processes, some possible machine intelligences probably would be conscious. Certainly, if you had something that was, say, an exact replica of a human, except implemented in silicon rather than in carbon, I think that very likely would be conscious. There is uncertainty as to how far the architecture could diverge from the human mind before you have something that has no consciousness. And rather than just picking some arbitrary point around that, we should acknowledge that we are uncertain about that, and ultimately that's an area for inquiry for, say, philosophy of mind, to try to clarify our concepts about that. But we should not allow our uncertainty and confusion about that to be an excuse for not confronting all these other issues that will arise whether or not the machines are conscious, and try to start to make progress there. I actually do think that's a separate, important, understudied issue. Like, if you think about the human track record in how we interact and treat animals, I think it leaves a lot to be desired. Right. Long before we get machine intelligence that is generally intelligent like a human, we might have more limited forms of AI that is maybe, say, at the level of a mouse or something like navigate the cluttered environment and learn some conditioned responses. And if we think that mice have some degree of moral status, then the question at some point arises whether these computer systems that have roughly the same capabilities as mice also might have some limited form of moral status. And I think it wouldn't be too early to start, at least in the context of, say, philosophical seminars, to begin to think about those issues.
We've got time for one more. How about the lady here in the front? She's been very patient here. Can we get the microphone to her right here?
Thank you. Well, you've talked a lot about superintelligence, artificial intelligence. So I hear that we have a trend of increasing intelligence. So my question is, how do we measure intelligence at all?
So, I mean, that's a very good. So, I think that I spoke loosely about, say, human-level machine intelligence. I think that that's really only useful in a very preliminary conversation to roughly, sketch the terrain here. But if you actually want to do research on it or think more carefully about it, then you need to replace this vague concept of human-level intelligence with more precise terminology. You might think of expressing a hypothesis in terms of very specific capabilities that different AI systems might have or might not have. And it's quite plausible that you will never actually have human-level machine intelligence. That is, instead, what you will have is machines that, like today, are superhuman in some respects and subhuman in other respects. Like they're much better at multiplying big numbers, like a lot less capable and common sense. And then at some point, you will have machines that are super intelligent in all respects. But at no point might you have machines that are sort of roughly comparable to humans in all respects. So I think that that's a very valid observation, that the concept of intelligence is, to the extent that it makes sense when we think of humans, because human intellectual faculties tend to be clustered. That is, there is some correlation between being good at different things. And so that's why we think, that's like, a smart human is a not so smart human. The smart human tends to be fast at learning a lot of different things, and generally. But with machine intelligence, these things can come apart in more ways. Nevertheless, I think that the endpoint is something that is clearly super intelligent, in that it's just going to perform much better in all cognitive domains than we do, and there will be no question. But in the meantime, what we do have are these specific domains where you can create metrics. In game AI, I had that slide because that's one area where you can actually easily compare human performance and machine. There's an objective criterion. Some other things like image recognition, you can compare human ability to classify images and attach labels, and machines now, in various respects, match or exceed humans in that. But designing better metrics for exactly good performance metrics is one of the research challenges that actually is an important part to make progress in machine intelligence, is to create these kind of good data sets with good metrics. And that's usually one of the ingredients you need if you want to sort of train up a machine learner to some kind of good way of actually measuring whether you're making the machine smart or not.
Mr. Bostrom, a final question. Do we ever reach a point where we get rid of the adjective artificial and intelligence is just intelligence?
I guess it depends on what you're interested in asking. So you might be, if you are interested in some question that revolves around the distinction between biological and artificial, then you'd want to include that epithet.
Will it always be measured against humans? Is that what makes it artificial? And if it becomes,
I mean, artificial just means, I think, engineered by intelligent design.
Okay.
In this context. So in that sense, we are natural intelligence because we were, a lot of produced by evolution, let's say. Whereas, if we build something through an engineering product, according to some design we have in mind, then it would be artificial, just like other things we build. So it's useful to be able to distinguish these kinds of things because they might have very different properties. And in that sense, it's useful to have a word for that. We wouldn't improve our thinking by not being able to, talk specifically about this new class of processes that we could bring into existence. They are different enough that there needs to be a word for it. It doesn't so much matter what that word is. You could call it synthetic intelligence. You could call it machine intelligence. You could, but as long as there is some distinctive label that allows us to talk about it, I'm happy.
Well, we appreciate you coming and talking with us. Let's give him a warm round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very good. Thank you.